Good afternoon and welcome to Managing and Mitigating Security Risk from Third-Party Vendors, a health system CIO Media Inc. production sponsored by ProTennis. Just a little housekeeping before we get started. My name is Anthony Guerra. I'm the editor-in-chief of Health Systems CIO, and I will be your moderator today. We're looking forward to your participation. You can send in your questions or comments in the Q&A box at any time, and we'll take them later in the program. Just so you see how we're going to spend our time today, first we're going to go about 40 minutes with our main panel discussion featuring Marti Arvin, VP and Chief Compliance and Privacy Officer with Erlanger Health System, Jim Brady, VP, Cybersecurity and Risk Management and CISO with Fairview Health Services, Teresa Meadows, SVP and CIO with Cook Children's Healthcare System, and Nick Culbertson, co-founder and CEO with ProTennis. Then we will have our audience Q&A. So we're going to jump right in. Lots of good stuff to talk about today. Teresa, let's start with you. Can you give us an overview of your organization and your role?
Sure. Hi, everybody. Cook Children's is a large integrated pediatric delivery system in downtown Fort Worth. I always say some people get us confused with Cook in Chicago. We're way south of Chicago. We're actually, this is fun to say, we're actually now 2 hospitals as of January 9th. We opened up our second facility in the Prosper area, so super excited about that. We have a large physician network where we employ about 500 physicians in our physician network, all specialties, primary care, urgent care, a health plan, home health, 2 joint ventures. So we're on a very big growth mode in the Dallas-Fort Worth area, but all pediatrics. So we're super excited. And thanks, Anthony, for having me.
Very good, Teresa. Thank you. Jim?
Hi, everybody. Jim Brady. I'm the VP and CISO at Fairview Health Services. Fairview is located in the Twin Cities in Minneapolis and St. Paul, Minnesota. We have about 10 hospitals, about 50 clinics, a very large specialty pharmacy unit, and we are very closely aligned through the mHealth Fairview brand with the University of Minnesota Med School and the University of Minnesota Physician Group. So as an academic health system, so we focus a lot on tertiary and quaternary care. We're about $7 billion in revenue. We're currently in discussions with Sanford Health for a potential merger. So that's kind of hit the news recently. So that would, I think if we combine the 2 organizations, we would be the 11th largest health system in the country. So happy to be here and excited to discuss this very important topic of third-party risk management.
Exciting times, Jim. Very good. Marti?
Well, good afternoon, everyone, or good morning for those of you who may be in Central or the West Coast time. I work for Erlanger Health System in Chattanooga, Tennessee. We're a multi-hospital system. We also have a physician practice group of about 450 providers between physicians and nurse practitioners. We have a standalone ED, and we have multiple joint ventures associated with home health, CyberKnife, and a couple of others. Very challenging times for us. I feel like I'm the odd duck on the panel because folks have security backgrounds, and I like to say to people, I don't speak geek, but I do an okay job of translating it.
Very good, Marti. You are very welcome here, and I'm sure you're going to add a lot to the conversation. Nick?
Good day, everyone. I'm Nick Culbertson, CEO and one of the co-founders of ProTennis. We use AI and automation to help improve compliance analytics for hospital systems. And I'll just say it out loud. We are the third party in the room. So I'm going to represent my company as a partner to hospital systems and talk today about how we do everything we can to partner well with our customers. Unfortunately, I can't speak for every third party out there, but I'm excited to hear from the panel exactly how we can do better and how health systems can do better to protect risk for their patients.
Excellent, Nick. Thank you. All right, let's jump right in. Teresa, we're going to start with you. Let's set the stage and sort of, this is kind of wide open. We'll see where you take it. How would you describe the challenge of managing third-party risk and, as fourth-party risk, something privacy and security professionals need to start dealing with, and we know where that goes to fifth and sixth parties, and that's lots of fun. Go ahead,
Yeah,
Teresa.
yeah. I mean, I think it's probably one of the biggest challenges organizations face, because there's not a healthcare organization that does not do business with third parties. And pretty much what you see is a lot of the third parties that we interact with also have access to critical patient information, or EPHI. And so, how do we begin to work through those third party relationships? And a lot of people think most of the third party relationships are just in IT and with IT software vendors and hardware vendors. But there are many third party relationships where we might outsource a portion of our business. So think about coding, for example. We might have a third party that does our coding for us, or we might have outsource our billing office, or we might have, traveling nurses that we hire through a third party. So third party risk is actually a fairly significant enterprise risk issue. It's less about IT. And so I love the makeup of this panel, because it's really the three-legged stool. You need your cyber review, you need your compliance review, and then IT review. And it really takes all three of those things to have a successful program. And so I think, this is something that probably I spend the most time on right now, just because it is a very large task. And it's something that we really haven't been doing probably well until probably the last, less than 5 years. Most organizations have not been doing third party risk probably until, right before COVID, if not just a little bit before. So it's a fairly new process for most organizations if you're doing some sort of risk management of the third party. So it's a wonderful topic. I'll let Marty or Jim add on.
All right, very good, Jim.
Yeah, those are great comments, Teresa. Yeah, I was just thinking that there's so many vendors that we're working with. I think I read a stat that about 60% of breaches now are coming from third parties. So there's quite a bit of exposure that we have. So one of the challenges, and I think you alluded to it, is it's so big now, and unless you've had a breach where all of a sudden everybody issues a call to arms and it gets a lot of attention, we simply don't have the staff to, assess do a security and privacy risk of all of our vendors. And then we've got a bunch of them already in our environment. So we need some type of a platform. And so I know there's several platform services out there that offer third-party risk management, services, so that you can the surveys will get filled out one time by the vendor, and then everybody that participates in that platform can leverage that. But it's, I know one of in addition, one of our challenges is that we've just got vendors that don't want to, conform to, how they remote access in. They want to use their method. They may say, well, this is a black box, or, in other words, this system, we can't put any antivirus on it or whatever. So, we're not able to secure it. So I think there's just, quite a bit of, effort that's needed in the contracting phase to really talk about the importance of security, so that both sides can agree on what's, going to be amicable, because, definitely a lot of risk.
Very good, Jim. Thank you. Marty, your thoughts?
Yeah, I think, I agree with what Teresa and Jim have said, that the fourth party risk, I think, is another area that more and more people are starting to get into, and looking at things like, we all have business associate agreements with the third party vendor that say you must get any downstream party to agree to substantially the same terms. And I don't know if any of you've ever looked at the agreements that your third parties are getting with those fourth and fifth downstream vendors, but it very often does not match the terms that you have in your agreement with them. And so it's thinking through, where are all the places your data is going, and where can it be, leaking out? And do you have some comfort that that third party is actually doing what they're supposed to be doing to help protect your data as it does get pushed out and further downstream? So, that's a piece. I won't say we've got our handles on the third party risk piece of it, but these are the kinds of things that cause me heartburn, because even if you got a handle on the third party, if you don't have a good handle on who they have as a fourth party, then you still have substantial risk.
Very good. Nick, your thoughts?
I appreciate all the comments that everyone said. Jim already threw out the stat of how much business associates and third parties are responsible for data breaches compared to their covered entities. I think this is a problem that's only going to get worse just by the nature of digitization of medical records and the sharing of information, which is going to make patient care better. It's really important that we do that, but it's creating a lot of exposure, and it's why you see in Congress a lot of discussion and debate on whether the rules should be changed. I think it's really important that health systems are keeping a close eye on new regulations that might be coming down in the near future, especially when you have large incidents like Meta, abusing the access that they have for their own purposes. So it's a really concerning area, and I think it's something that, as an industry, we're all trying to get a grasp on and do better. And it just takes a lot of work.
All right. Very good, Nick. Thank you. Okay. Next question, Jim, we're going to start with you. Describe some features of your third-party risk program, sort of that you like. You're like, we got this piece down. We're doing this part well. I think this is a nice policy or procedure we've got.
Yeah, definitely. Okay, so I mentioned the platform, third-party risk management platform. So I think that probably was the thing that really made a difference in our third-party initiative. So we are using a platform, and I explained it just briefly a few moments ago. But what it does is it gives us the ability to not burden the vendors with having to do annual risk assessments where they have to go to us individually, where they just go one time. So the platform we're using, I know there's several out there. I think there's about 20,000 vendors that do business with healthcare. So they have they have their questionnaires all filled out, so we can catch people. Definitely, we're now catching them for all new procurements, anything that's a significant change in the contract, renewals, et cetera. That's a gate that we're catching, where we will have those surveys looked at. We can look at the surveys that they filled out in general, and then we can ask questions. So it really just speeds up the process. So you no longer need an army of people to tackle the third-party risk vendors. I know we have I think around 1,500 vendors on the IT side that we do business with. So it's there's no way we would have the time to be able to interact with those folks. And I know it should make it a little bit easier. I know, Nick, maybe you can add to that if it helps. If you didn't have to go to 600 different customers and complete all those risk assessments. So I think that's helpful. And also we're in a phase where we're definitely we're getting the new procurements, but then we're also going back based on risk, and then based on when they made a contract with us, we're adding those in and getting them into the system so that we can have a good idea of where are our high risk, we're PHI, PCI, PII vendors, so we can focus on them. So we're kind of tracking. It's going to take us another year or so to get them all in the system, but that's been super helpful.
Very good, Marty.
I have to say, for us, I think we're still getting this solidified. So things and I'm still getting an understanding, having been here just over a year. So I think there are probably features that do work well that I'm not yet familiar with. I think looking through this and offloading it, as Jim said, I think is one of the better ways to do it, because it is very time consuming, and there are ways you can coordinate this. And I'd be interested in Nick's comments, and Teresa, whether you do this as well, whether where you have and say, give us your risk assessment that was done by an independent third party. And a lot of vendors have liked that in my past life, because they get that assessment and they can give it to multiple clients instead of me asking you to complete the questionnaire. If you can give me something that was done by a reputable third party, then I can rely on that and not have to complete that for however many clients you might have as a third party vendor.
Teresa?
Yeah, a couple things to add. We're definitely doing something similar to what Jim is doing around the crowdsourcing, because you're never going to have enough resources to do risk assessments on everything that we have to risk assess. So that's been super helpful to have that database where we can actually go and kind of use the crowdsourced data that's already been tapped into. But the other thing that I think that we're doing well is really around education, and educating purchasers about why we have to do the risk assessment before we can complete the contractual process. And we've actually built sort of a checklist that says, here's the things that we're going to be concerned about. Go ahead and provide those to whoever you're having conversations with. So if I'm having one of my IT managers do some initial fact gathering around a new product someone wants to buy, we go ahead and provide them our standard about how we want, what our expectations are around risk and risk assessments, and early in the process. So sometimes doing that, what allows us to do is see what kind of partner that particular vendor may be. Because if we get a lot of pushback about their security posture, then that leads to other questions that we like to ask. And so we try to build that in early in the process, so we already know kind of what we're dealing with up front. And then the other thing that we've done is we've partnered very closely with legal for agreements that aren't really IT related. So if I'm going to outsource a department function, we've been working with them on making sure that some of these same questions are being asked from a privacy and compliance perspective. And we've kind of shared that template out so that they can share it with others as they're going through the selection process. I think there's just a ton of education around risk. The average buyer doesn't appreciate risky behavior, especially like around medical devices and other things that are less concrete, when you're doing your evaluation. So that having some of that ongoing education is extremely helpful.
Very good. Nick, your thoughts?
So I think Pertennis is a little unique in this space in that we are a compliance analytics company. We live, breathe privacy, security, and compliance every day. And so I really push our team to make sure we're always going above and beyond when it comes to partnering with our customers to make sure that we're doing everything we possibly can to minimize risk. But Teresa pointed this out earlier, not every vendor is in the compliance space. And when you have billing, coding, or nursing staffing, they may not be thinking about all of the requirements. And so we've come across a lot of other third-party risk assessment vendors like Jim is talking about. And in many ways, they do streamline the process, but there's also 20,000 of them that are out there on the market. And so, we have built into our infrastructure to make sure that brute force is the only way you can really handle it. You can't automate it if there's that many vendors and they're all asking just slightly different questionnaires or asking similar questions slightly different ways. And so, we're able to do that. We really like what Marty was talking about when we can just provide our risk assessment, because we invest a lot of effort into doing our own SOC audits or risk assessment audits. And, we try to follow standard guidelines like NIST so that we can just provide that documentation and check a lot of boxes. But, it's really important that if we are doing some additional survey, we make sure we go through that effort to be able to meet any of our customers' needs. So honestly, I would say it's really nice when health systems can build a partnership with their vendors and really understand what they're doing. I think that's necessary when you have high risk work that's being done with vendors, because you can't build a partnership with every third party, and having some kind of automated process or some kind of trusted process is really important.
All right, very good. Next question. Do you stratify your vendors into tiers that differentiate them by criticality so they can receive different levels of attention? So it seems like there's a couple ways to break this down. Obviously, there's a PHI, vendors dealing with PHI and vendors not dealing with PHI. Is that sort of the first step in figuring out how to put these third-party vendors into buckets so that they can each receive different levels of scrutiny? Marty, I don't know if this is your area, if you play in this area, but do you have thoughts on this kind of approach?
Well, again, I haven't gotten knee deep in what we do here at Erlanger, but I've definitely dealt with this in the past. And, I think you got to be cautious about just looking at PHI, because there's a lot of very significant sensitive data that could be beyond that. I think you stratify it associated with risk, or at least that's how I would always recommend it. And there might be things you'd be willing to live with in a contract where the vendor touches very little PHI or PII, but you still need to have some sort of something in the agreement versus somebody who hosts your entire EHR. I mean, if they're hosting your entire EHR, obviously, if they had a data compromise and weren't properly securing it, you're going to have a lot more to deal with. And so I think one thing is to make sure you're looking at it, whatever data they have, because again, there's risk associated with sensitive data across the board. You probably have a little more regulatory exposure if you talk about PHI from the covered entity perspective, but I do think that it's helpful to stratify it. I don't think you want to necessarily ignore all those folks that have, very little interaction with it, but you have to develop some process where you're scrutinizing them on some sort of a routine basis. Maybe you do that vendor that has lots of data every year versus the vendor that has minimal or limited data might be every 2 or 3 years. But I don't think you want to just necessarily say we don't have to do anything with them simply because they don't have a ton of PHI. The other thing I'd really, really emphasize is know what they have and scrutinize those documents. A lot of times you'll find vendors and you're like, why do you need all this data for what you're doing for us? And sometimes they haven't thought about it. And other times they've said, well, we want to do these other things with the data that really aren't tied to what we're doing for you. But, if we're willing to give it to them, they're certainly going to be willing to take it. So understanding and recognizing, what data you're giving them, do you meet minimum necessary if it's PHI? And all of those things are going to be important to think through that risk level.
Very good, Teresa.
Yeah, the only thing I would add to that, I agree 100% with what Marty said, is, originally when we started risk assessing systems, it was really because of HIPAA and theft of data and, some of the requirements we have under those laws. Now, part of the risk assessment process is their technical infrastructure, because if it is not secure and safe, the way they architect a product or the way that product connects to our network, that could be a higher risk depending on, the severity of their network architecture or their application architecture. Because then you do put PHI or even, sensitive critical information about an organization at risk, and you open the door for other things like ransomware, et cetera. So when we do our risk assessments, we not only look at the volume of PHI and how we how do we stratify that, but also are there other risk factors that we need to mitigate for? So for example, if it's a medical device and it's the only medical device that does a certain clinical function, we're going to need to architect that and put that on a high watch list with some of our other tools that we have around medical device monitoring or something like that. So I think our risk assessment process has gotten more complex. It was easier when we were just worried about theft of PHI or loss of PHI, but now it's actually more complex because we're worried about other things that may or may not impact PHI.
And again, those other things, Teresa, a little bit more
Yeah,
on that.
ransomware is a big one. So if I have a tool that's architected correctly and it's a web-based tool and that can allow access into my environment, which then causes ransomware to spread throughout my organization, that's a pretty high risk in my opinion. If they can't provide us either a standard audit or some other feedback on how their security architecture is done. So we're looking at things like that as well that could be risk of connecting to you because you don't have as good as hygiene as you need to around cyber. And we're seeing that more and more with cloud-based vendors who are developing smaller applications. They don't have all the infrastructure they need to be secure, which could open the door for other problems. So we really look at some of those types of things.
Very good, Jim.
Yeah, I was going to piggyback on Teresa's comment about the ransomware. Yeah, so I think we've looked at the tiering, PHI, PII, PCI from a data breach perspective, but the bigger worry and concern is, do these third-party vendors and partners, do they have access to our environment, and then can they come in, move laterally? If they're compromised, maybe they don't even know they're compromised. We mentioned fourth-party risk earlier. That's a huge concern. So just looking at that and assessing that, we've seen Kaseya, I think that was last year sometime, where that affected so many people. There's SolarWinds, there's Microsoft Exchange, if you're still running an outdated Exchange or an older system that had a big vulnerability. And the list goes on and on about, bad actors entering into the environment. And so I think we're prepared for, maybe several hours or a day or two of downtime, but we're not, in general, I don't think health systems are ready to go for a 3 to 4 week downtime. Of course, we don't want that because that's going to be really difficult to, care for patients, and revenue generation is going to be difficult. So I think that's a big concern. So how do we make sure that we're looking and stratifying vendors based on what is their risk? So one of the things we're doing with our third-party risk management program is we do assign a internal inherent risk rating and then a residual risk rating, and that's actually on that third-party risk management platform. And then the second thing we're doing is we're spending a lot of time trying to quantify the risk of how much of our revenue, if we had a 1 in 100 event, which is meaning the odds of getting it are 1%, but if you do get hit with that 2 to 3 week downtime, how much revenue is exposed based on other health systems getting dinged, and based on the number of controls that you've got, and then looking to quantify how much needs to be offset with cyber insurance and potentially more projects on the security and privacy side. And I think I don't know that we've applied that methodology though to third-party risk management. So it's something I know that I'm going to be spending more time on in 2023. So how can I quantify to the senior management, to the board, on X amount of millions of dollars is at risk, third-party wise. So that's something I think that we got some work cut out for us.
Hey, Anthony, can I add one more comment?
Please,
So,
please.
what really has been driving this is, if you recall last year when Kronos was breached, that really put a strain on health systems who were hosting their data. Of course, it wasn't PHI, but they went without payroll services. And so, to Jim's point, that's one of the things we're actively working on, is that third-party risk. And how do we quantify it? So if my payroll system is down for 4 weeks and I pay people possibly incorrectly because I'm doing it manually, that's a higher risk. That company is a higher risk. And we would love for that company to share more information about their security posture. And that's just one good example. We had this happen with, our patient satisfaction vendors. We had it happen with our foundation software vendors. So this, like in our mind, is a really big flag that if we're going to put all our eggs in a, hosting basket, we need more information about their security posture than we would if we were going to host it ourselves. And so so we're spending a lot of time on that. So I think you're going to see that part of the evaluation become more and more critical the more we allow to be hosted outside of our 4 walls, which everybody is. So we've got to figure out, and we need cooperation from our partners to share the critical data that we need to feel comfortable that we're making the right decision.
Well, Jim mentioned that sometimes the cooperation isn't quite there. So Jim, listen, this is going to vary by vendor, because there's always a power dynamic relationship between a customer and a vendor. And the bigger the health system, the more power it has. The bigger the vendor, the more power it has. So you pick any 2 organizations, and that will define the nature of that relationship and the relative power of each entity, Jim. So I'm guessing when you're not getting cooperation, it has something to do with that power dynamic. The big vendors are maybe not going to be running around trying to get you all the answers you need.
Yeah, if I can just comment on that. So I know that Nick and ProTennis they're amazing, very cooperative, and it's awesome. But there are larger vendors that are not used to getting any requirements from their their customers or clients, and they do things a certain way, and and they want to do it their way, and they as I mentioned, they might black box their networks or their systems, et cetera. And then you initially try to get some flexibility, and you're talking to people that are not maybe they're at the lower level. So I think one of the things that we've been doing is during the contracting phase, really partnering with the vendor, talking about the importance of security and privacy, and making sure that they understand what are the implications on both, and making sure they know what our requirements and requests are. And I think that as we've done that, we've seen a lot of vendors actually working with us. So they're definitely not all bad. I just think that some of the large ones, particularly maybe in the medical device space, where they have certain FDA regulations and rules that they kind of follow, and they're used to just sort of deploying, and then you as a customer, you pretty much have to get what you're given. Those are a little bit more challenging, but I think that the majority of vendors I'm finding are wanting to come to the table particularly at the contracting phase, and are open to a discussion, and will do whatever is needed on their end to try to have the customer be secure and satisfied.
So Nick, as someone who will do whatever is needed for their customers, of course, what are your thoughts on this question?
No pressure, Nick. No
No,
pressure.
no pressure. Tell us
Yeah.
how great you are, Nick.
Well, I think I really appreciate the stratification of vendors and the power dynamics. We're a small company, and we really lean into the direct partnership relationship. We invest a lot into our customer success team to make sure there's a lot of transparency in what we're doing, because we think that gets us a long way. But it is interesting to think about the power dynamics. If you need a vendor and they're the only one in this space, you don't have a lot of options. And so I like what Jim was saying about measuring that against revenue or calculating that risk. I mean, everything is just a risk calculation. I can say, why we are a third-party vendor, we also work with vendors, and we try to take a very opposite approach of hospital systems, which is we try to minimize what kind of vendors we're working, because we don't want to create more fourth-party vendors for our customers. So we try to minimize that as much as possible. So not the best answer to the question, since we're the third party, but that's what we think.
No, it's an interesting dynamic, and I've spoken to a lot of CISOs lately who are getting involved in the application rationalization process in order to minimize that vendor universe and ecosystem. So it's like, whoa, before we bring on another one, let's see if we've got what you need in-house. Why keep increasing that risk if we don't have to? So that is a very interesting dynamic. All right, next question. Teresa, we're going to start with you. Putting in a new vendor onboarding process may be manageable, maybe not, but at least you got a shot at it, right? Here's our new process. Everyone who comes in and wants a vendor assessment is going to go through this new assessment with these new standards. But, as Jim mentioned, we got 1,500 already here who are in-house. So, okay, the next one that comes in, we got that, but who wants to look at these 1,500? So that seems to me a big issue. And then it's the continual, okay, and we'll get to this a little later, but okay, how often are we going to review those 1,500? Platforms help, which Jim mentioned, a good platform can help. But Teresa, what are your thoughts on, sort of getting your arms around this and not having a panic attack when you start thinking about tackling this problem? Right.
Yeah, I'm Gilbert right now. I'm screaming and running from the room. This is definitely just a process problem that people need to figure out how to address. I mean, technically, we should be assessing all of our systems that have EPHI annually. But the other approach that we've taken is definitely either on contract renewal. So most of our contracts are 3 or 5 years. So when a contract comes up for renewal, that's our time to assess that particular product. Or if we have the opportunity during an upgrade or any kind of enhancement to a system, we take that opportunity to reassess products. So we tried to build in, processes that said, okay, we're not Jim, we have 400, which is still a lot. How do we do everything and do it timely? And so that's kind of been our process, is as things come up for renewal, upgrades, changes, we do that risk assessment at that point, if it hasn't had one in the last 3 years. And so we've kind of got things on a 3-year cycle if they don't have PHI, and then the annual cycle for all the EPHI systems. And so do we get them all done? Probably not, but at least we're trying to tackle as many as we can in any given year. That's why the crowdsourcing and having a tool is so important, because I have 2 people who do risk assessments, and they could not do it without that help from the third party. There'd just be no way to keep up with the volume. So that's kind of our approach to kind of work through that issue.
Very good, Jim.
Yeah, Teresa pretty much said it all. She took everything I was going to say and encapsulated it really good. So I can also mention that time goes by pretty quickly in healthcare. So I know Teresa mentioned 3 to 5 year contracts, but that time can go by really fast. And so if you have a lot to get through, then I think as long as you're making progress and you're chipping away at that list, then you could get trued up, and then any changes that have gone on in the environment or upgrades, et cetera, then those things can help accelerate it. So you can get to the finish line quickly. And I think the important thing is to have a process to be making headway and be narrowing that subset of vendor systems that haven't been looked at. And then it's really what risk management's all about. It's not eliminating it tomorrow to zero, but it's reducing the risk to some acceptable level. So we can only do what we can do, and based on our resources. So I think that's important to keep that in mind.
Marty, your thoughts?
Well, I agree with everything that Teresa and Jim have said. And the one thing that I would add to this is a little bit outside the scope of your question, but it's an area that has caused me some angst, is doing that follow-up once that relationship with the vendor has ceased and you've terminated it, and also monitoring how you're getting your data back. And if you agree it's not feasible to get it back, and they say, well, we need to keep it for another 3 years because of our regulatory obligations, is anybody monitoring 3 years from now whether that data has actually been destroyed? I've not come across any good process for that. So if anybody on the panel has it, please share with me.
Well, that is an excellent point, Marty, that I had not thought much about. Does anyone, we'll use that as your ask a co-panelist question, perhaps. Does anyone have a thought on that? Has anyone thought, I mean, it's like we're trying to get our arms around the front end, and Marty's already got her mind on the back end, which makes a lot of sense. Nick, I'm going to throw you under the bus. What's that's a serious.
Just to be clear, I don't have my arms around it. That's a question I'm posing.
No, but it's just a place to start thinking. Nick, any thoughts on that?
Well, 2 thoughts. So one, we deal with data retention policies that are adjustable based on our customers' needs. And so we have it automated into our platform so that if there is a retention period, we make sure that there's as new data is created, new data is being pulled off from the platform as well. But also to just reinforce Teresa and Jim's comments. We have customers who follow up survey like every time we renew a contract. We have some do it like every 3 or so years. We have some that send quick surveys every year and say, hey, no changes, right? Like, you're still good. I will say, as a vendor, especially as a growing company, I feel like our company is a completely different company every 6 months. We're constantly making changes, not just to our technology, pushing out releases every 2 weeks, but also, bringing on new team members, changing internal workflows and processes. Now, I hope I'm not giving people heartburn, because I like to think we're building in the right direction and building in security and compliance into our infrastructures and actually improving over time. We maintain a repository for our sales, marketing, security, and compliance teams of I think it's over 1,000 different elements to help answer these kind of questionnaires and stay on top of it. But without going back and confirming with vendors. And we've had some customers that we do a security questionnaire when we first sign up, and then we kind of don't hear from them. And I think I would encourage health systems to think about what's the regularity, so that if you are switching, bringing this back to the question, if you're rolling out a new program, there should be some kind of ongoing like rechecking or re-verifying throughout that partnership to ultimately get everyone over to that new standard, and building in questions like, have you gotten rid of the data that you were supposed to get rid of?
Well, that's a good point, Nick. And I was going to ask you about that, which is, your advice to people that are on the line, mostly individuals from health systems, about how they should be viewing and managing that third party risk. So it sounds like one of the things you're saying is, yeah, you got to be checking in periodically, because companies change, we think we change the right way, and we build in security and compliance into our growth, but maybe not everybody is. So it can't be one and done. And it maybe even that, I don't know, that once a year, hey, has anything changed? I mean, you're relying a lot on the honesty and goodwill of that vendor. I mean, there's a lot of trust that goes into this whole thing working with these questionnaires. Am I right?
It ultimately comes down to trust, which is why I think it's a good idea to stratify your vendors, depending on what level of risk you have. Some that you should probably get a little bit more in the weeds and get a little bit closer to their operations. But I think it's important to check in and really understand what changes have made, especially because we always talk about M&A in hospital systems, but there's a lot of M&A activity in vendors as well. And so when a vendor gets scooped up by a larger enterprise, one of the things that private equity typically does is they say, well, we're going to streamline operations by rolling up IT and security and compliance all into one umbrella. And then suddenly you have a team that's now responsible for a brand new product or whole new market. And they may not be as familiar with all the nuances. And so that, being able to check in after an acquisition or, after a merger, I think is really important.
Hey, Anthony, can I add
Yes,
one thing to
please.
Marty's question?
Please.
I think this is a lesson everybody's learning over time. And so when we had, when our patient satisfaction vendor had ransomware, that's when the aha light went on that we needed to actually see how much data they had. And they had 10 years worth of data, which was, I forget how many, 3 million unique patients or something like that. And so that's when we started scrutinizing, how much data should they have? How much should they keep? Are we great on the follow-up? No, but I think we're getting better, especially with to Nick's point, the higher risk systems that we know have a lot of PHI and that we've agreed contractually that they'll only keep it for X amount of time. We're getting better at keeping track of who those are and then doing the follow-up questions. But we didn't really get the clue phone until we had to investigate something and figure out what the actual problem was. And they were holding the data because they might do research.
Might, right?
Might do
Might.
research at some
Yeah.
point, right? And so now we look for those things contractually where we never looked for them before. And we also think about how much data we're going to be giving them so we can put that, at least the ability to do it, which is very difficult. So even the ability to audit or ask questions in contractual relationships, very hard to get. There's a lot of negotiation that goes back and forth about the right to audit, the right to ask questions, that kind of stuff. And so it's real important that you start thinking about that on the front end, like how much data is going to be there. Okay, if the contract's for 3 years, that's 3 million patients. That's X amount of money. If you took $400 per patient per whatever, you could start getting the idea. But we recently have gone back and doing what you suggested, which is, did you get rid of it when we asked you to? Because you contractually committed to get rid of it. So we need to make sure that you do it and sign an attestation. So we have an attestation form that we actually have them sign that says, yes, we eliminated your data. And so I think those are ways to kind of get around some of the issues that you mentioned before.
Mhm.
Jim, I just want to touch on a point made earlier. We talked about different ways of stratifying risk. One could be PHI, non-PHI, though Marty said you certainly, it goes deeper than that. You can't just do it that way and be done with it. Teresa touched on another way of stratifying a relationship, which is, have we transferred data to them, meaning, okay, they've got data, whether it be P or HI or not, versus are there open pipes between the organizations where a ransomware over there event can get into our laterally move into our network? Is that another way to stratify these relationships where we've transferred data but there are no open pipes to get in versus there are open pipes? Is that make sense?
Yeah, and like I say, I totally agree with it. And I think I mentioned it, that access to systems in the environment is a critical, area. Do we have visibility? That's why in our health system we push for a standardized approach, like a standardized way to connect over a web browser to access the systems. So we have visibility. It's going through our firewall, so we can kind of detect what's going on. But if you have these VPN B2B connections, or you have some, everybody wants to use their own special, way to connect, and we don't have visibility, so we can't track it. So in the event that something does happen on the vendor side, and trust me, it has happened, on multiple occasions to many health systems, and where, we've had a number of our vendors got hit with Kaseya, et cetera. And so we immediately had to take action. We just severed that VPN connection that they would use, to be able to gain access to the systems. So at least we could, quarantine while they went ahead and addressed it. So I think having visibility in a standardized way and just making sure that's in there contractually is important. And then, for our vendor partners to realize that if we have to manage hundreds of vendors, then, I know that they have their favorite way to do it and their favorite tool, and no, they can't support the system without, they have to use this particular product. So I think there's a little bit of give and take there, but it's important that we can manage all of our extensions of our, essentially they're extending our IT team, and by being, connected in that service agreement. So we have to find ways to have visibility and control. So we do spend some time with that, talking about that at the contractual level.
Marty, have you looked at that or dealt a lot with that, the contractual requirements for notification of breaches and things like that?
Yes, this is, anybody's heard me speak on it knows this is one of my soapbox issues, because I remind people that when you look at the definition of a breach in the HIPAA regulations, if you call it a breach, that means somebody has already evaluated low probability of compromise. I prefer not, no offense, Nick, but I prefer not to leave that exclusively to a vendor. I've had experiences, not with Nick's company, to be very clear, but with vendors that have said, oh, we have this compromise, we evaluated it, it's not a breach, that it fits one of the exceptions, or there's a low probability of compromise. And I've said, okay, tell me more. And I've either disagreed that it fit the exception, or I've said, no, I don't agree with you that it's low probability of compromise. So I prefer to have an agreement that says they notify us of any data compromise involving our information, and that they have to allow us to review the assessment they did, because the obligation to notify remains with the covered entity. It does not transfer to the business associate. So my organization has the obligation to notify if it doesn't meet the criteria and have a low probability of compromise, and in fact is a breach. So I prefer to say, we have to have a process. You have to be willing to share with me. You may do the assessment, but I want to hear more about what you did, what you found, how you determined there was low probability of compromise. Because if I don't agree with you, then I may make a choice and say, we're going to notify, because I don't think the way you evaluated it, it's not the way we would have evaluated it. And again, there's a risk tolerance perspective there. But if if you say that I'm going to score something, say, for example, and if it scores 5 or below, I'm going to say that's not a breach. If it scores 6 to 9, I'm going to look at it further. And if it scores 10 or more, then we're just going to say that's a breach. Well, that's something I did in a prior organization. But I worked with one client that said their scoring system was, total points of 27. Anything 18 or less, they considered low probability of compromise. And I'm like, I'm not sure how you can say it meets a risk score that's 2/3 of the points it can get, and that's a low probability of compromise. So my point in saying that is if you have a vendor who's using that kind of process, I would not be comfortable calling that low probability of compromise. So definitely put the language in there. The regs require that they notify you of a breach without undue delay, but no more than 60 days. I think many of us put a shorter time frame in there than the full 60 days. Even though, once you notify me, now I've got my 60-day clock running if it's determined that notification is required to the patient or to OCR. But we often put shorter timeframes in there and push back. And I literally just dealt with a vendor at the end of last week who said, you have no business knowing how we analyzed whether it was a breach or not. And it's like, excuse me, but yeah, I think we do.
Mm-hmm. Anybody else want to comment on the concept of notification, contractual notification? If the pipes are open and they have a ransomware event, the minutes count, right?
Yeah, actually, we require for telling us about the problem. No, diagnosing the problem is 15 minutes, and we have a resolution time of 2 hours if there's a security breach. And we, can come through email or what have you, but we do have some language in the contract for that.
Teresa?
Yeah, we also build in that language, but to Marty's point, that it's always the language they want to fight over. Literally, they want to fight over. And so we usually end up deferring to what they're legally obligated to do. And then we try to make it more stringent. And sometimes we're lucky and sometimes we're not. So I think this is an ongoing thing that if the governments were going to look at things, that would be something that as part of, revision to high tech or one of those rulings where they do have more obligation to report, and it's more detail. We need the detail. And so just them telling us they had something happen is not the same as telling us exactly what happened, so we know how to handle it from our perspective. And so that could be a place where we could improve our business associate relationships and their relationships with other third parties. That doesn't exist today.
Nick, it's an interesting discussion. The health systems are obviously looking at it from their point of view. A vendor may, is looking at it from their point of view, may have hundreds of customers. Dealing with a security incident when you have hundreds of customers, so they all need to know, but you're dealing with the incident too, and you've got 15 minutes to deal with it and 2 hours to tell Jim. So it could be a lot of pressure there, a pressure-filled situation. But what are your thoughts there in terms of what's reasonable to expect? What should health systems be requiring of their third parties?
Well, I can say my answer is going to be a little bit nuanced. Like, I think it is important for hospital systems to reach out and ask for the details and really understand what's going on. From our perspective, we do get into situations where we may push back a little bit, and especially when the requests are blanket and general. And the reason for that is we want to avoid situations where all of our customers can request anything at any time, and it just creates a lot of complexity to our operations, and where they're requests that we may not be able to keep up with. What we do is we try to fall back on, well, let's really understand what we're trying to solve for. What is going to give the confidence of that we are doing the right thing and that we are working together collaborative on this. And I think this, just to bring up another point that I think is important when working with vendors, really comes down to who you're talking to at the company. And so we may pull in, our privacy officer or our CISO to let's have a conversation about what is the right information we should be sharing and how we should be working at this together to get to best place that makes sense for us operationally, but also addresses the concerns and make sure that we're all on the same page here. So, we devil's in the details when it gets to this for sure.
Well, we are just about out of time. I want to apologize for people that sent in questions that I did not get to. I didn't get to my ask a co-panelist good fun time. But you know, we had a lot to cover here. What we didn't cover, what's next in my thought process in this is the internal business continuity planning that has to go into place in a health system, working with the users and saying, this application, if and when it becomes unavailable, do you know what you're going to do? Right? And that's all got to be workshopped, and they have to make sure that they can deal with it. So that's kind of the next step in this third party risk as far as I see it. But that's about all we had time for today regarding continuing education. You could use the final slide in this deck. You'll get an email when the on-demand recording of this event is ready for viewing. If you want to sponsor an event with us, you can reach out to Nancy Wilcox from our team, and you can go to our website to register for upcoming panels. With that, I want to thank this tremendous panel, Marti, Arvin, Jim Brady, Teresa Meadows, and Nick Culbertson. I want to thank Pro Tennis for sponsoring, and I want to thank all our attendees for coming. And with that, everybody have a wonderful day. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.